Thanks everybody for joining us. Welcome on this lovely spring afternoon. We're sorry to take you away from the yard or the beach, but we're so glad that you're able to join us this afternoon. Uh, we have a lot to talk about with you this afternoon. Our program is packed with information about the multifaceted Mill Bend Preserve Project and the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy's progress since the last forum that we held in August last year. I'd like to just take a moment to introduce the project team to you. My name is Dave Schbach. I'm the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy's project manager for the Mill Bend Integrated Conservation Project. I'm joined by members of the project team, John Walton, Vice President of the Board of Directors, Jim Nybakken, member of the Board of Directors, Laura Baker, who is our colleague from Friends of Walla River, Joan Schwan, the project manager at Prunuske Chatham Inc, Lauren Hammock, principal in charge at Prunuske Chatham, Maggie Jensen, the lead designer from Prunuske Chatham. And I do want to give a shout out to my predecessor and extremely difficult act to follow, Kathleen Chasey. Thanks, Kathleen, for joining us this afternoon. Next slide. Actually, you can skip over to goals. The goals of our gathering this afternoon are for the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy to share information about the work that's happened since our last public forum, including the results of a September survey, the outcome of property conveyance to the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy, volunteer stewardship of the Preserve and Pioneer Cemetery, ongoing studies about existing resource conditions, progress of planning for restoration, conservation, and public access, and the next steps that we'll be taking after your input this afternoon toward completing an integrated conservation guide to plan ahead for future improvement, stewardship, education, research uses of this important property. We'd like to gather input from you today, your reactions to the work that you'll see, work in progress that you'll see. Because of the density of information, the limited time available to us, we've done a little bit of reconfiguration of our approach to getting your input. We will be publishing a detailed questionnaire survey online after this event. But what we'd like you to do, as Joel mentioned earlier, is use the chat function in the Zoom webinar instrument to write us your questions or write us your comments in that chat function. We'll keep track of them. And later on in the program, we'll have about 20 minutes to do a question and answer session. We hope to get through all of your questions, but if we don't, again, we intend to publish a question and answer survey in a week or two after our event today. We also want to invite you to continue to engage with the project team, with Redwood Coast Land Conservancy and our partners to explore opportunities at the Mill Bend Preserve site. Come and enjoy the property, roll up your sleeves, join us with volunteer work. By all means, if you can, donate to help the work continue to move forward. Next slide, please. Just a little housekeeping. Once again, at the bottom of your window, there's a chat button. You can also see other functions in the Zoom technology, such as a list of participants. And you can also manipulate your video feed if you need. Again, please do use the chat feature to communicate with us during the session. And we will be keeping track of your questions to the extent that we can answer them. This afternoon we will, and others we'll track for later work. The webinar manager, Joel, is going to keep microphones muted in order to avoid any problems with crosstalking and communications. And also this way, you won't need to silence your telephones as you would in a movie theater. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy website at rclc.org in a few days after the event. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce Tina Batt. Tina is the president of the board of directors of the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy, and Tina will take you through a little background on RCLC.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. The Redwood Coast Land Conservancy was founded in 1992. We're almost 30 years old. And we are a nonprofit land trust. We were formed initially to build the Gualala Bluff Trail and provide other public access sites for our community. The trail was outlined as a goal in the Gualala Town Plan, which had just been developed at that time. Our mission is to conserve the scenic, natural environment of coastal lands and watersheds in the southern Mendocino and northern Sonoma counties. We provide public access and education about the value of our natural heritage. We serve the coastal watersheds from the Jenner River north to Point Arena. We preserve land and water. We restore coastal watersheds and their habitat. We protect our coastal lands from unforeseen impacts, like the increase in the number of visitors due to COVID and climate impacts. And we provide public access for the community and visitors to the coast. We're a 10-member volunteer board. We have one part-time staff person, Dave Spack. We have an advisory committee of individuals who help manage our different properties, and close to 100 volunteers who participate in stewardship and outreach activities in support of RCLC. Next slide, please. Here's our coastal access map. It shows where our properties are located. And at this point, I want to acknowledge the California State Coastal Conservancy. They've helped us from the very beginning. The Coastal Conservancy has supported us as we acquire our properties and conservation easements, and they've helped provide funding to develop those easements and properties. And they include Hearn Gulch to the north, Cooks Beach, the Gualala Bluff Trail, which runs through the town of Gualala, and now Mill Bend. The California Coastal Trail is a priority of the Conservancy, and we've been able to complete sections of that trail all the way through Mill Bend with their help. Next slide, please. And here are our funders and supporters. As I mentioned, the California State Coastal Conservancy has been there from the start. They brought us U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which partially funded the acquisition of Mill Bend, as did the California Natural Resources Agency through their Environmental Enhancement and Mitigation Grant Program. And then the California State Coastal Conservancy funded the planning work that you're going to learn more about today, and the work of Prunuske Chatham. Our community funders include the Alamo Foundation, our interim conservation buyer, Cindy Kennedy, who managed two very complicated transactions, Friends of Gualala River, who were there from the start with funding and support, as was Gualala Arts, our neighbor. Sonoma County Regional Parks, our neighbor to the south, has been there and will continue to support our work on Mill Bend. Mendocino Land Trust, an early partner. Sonoma Land Trust, a partner and funder. And the Resources Legacy Fund supported our acquisition with funds that were granted through the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And the Community Foundation of Mendocino County, which is not on this slide, but they have given us two recent grants, both for our strategic planning and to support Elise Allen's internship, and you'll hear from Elise later on in the presentation. Our community partners include NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Coastal Commission, Western Rivers Conservancy, California Native Plant Society, and a couple Audubon chapters. Thank you all. And then most importantly, all of you, our 800 donors and supporters, thank you for getting us this far. And you'll see from this presentation that we have a lot of work ahead of us. I'd like to acknowledge the elected officials that have attended and introduce our board of directors. In addition to serving as board president, I co-chair our fundraising and outreach committee, and we're working on starting up our land acquisition committee. And John Walton, our vice president, is helping me with that, as well as serving on the stewardship committee and the Mill Bend team. Bob Rudemuller, an early RCLC founder, is our treasurer and finance committee chair, and he and his wife, Mary Sue, manage the Gualala Bluff Trail. Joel Chabin, our secretary, managing this forum, and our website and database also manages Cook's Beach. Cheryl Harris is our co-chair of fundraising and outreach. She manages all the volunteers and is helping to start the environmental and cultural outreach program. Jim Nybakken is our stewardship chair. He manages the Mill Bend team with Dave. Trish Miller serves on our land acquisition committee. She's managing Hearn Gulch and working on a new acquisition there, which will complete a section of the California Coastal Trail, and is also helping with our business partnership program. Robin Applegarth serves on our fundraising and outreach committee. She helped develop our website and is responsible for our wonderful quarterly newsletter. Kay Martin serves on our stewardship committee and the Mill Bend team, and she's responsible for our cemetery restoration. And Ken Fisher serves on our finance committee. He helps with our insurance needs and manages the Hathaway Creek conservation easement. Past board members in attendance: Lori Mueller, our past board president, wonderful leader, also serves on our fundraising and outreach committee. We haven't lost her. Lois Lutz is our past board secretary. Kathleen Chasey, as Dave mentioned, our Mill Bend project manager who got us started on all of this. Tom Cochran is with us, our resident geologist, Nancy Trissel, Doug Hammerstrom, and Bruce Jones. Thank you all. And now I'd like to introduce John Walton, our vice president, and he'll talk about Mill Bend history. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Tina. You can't talk about Mill Bend history without including the timber industry on the northern coast of California. But the real history began long before that. I suspect most of you have been in a old growth redwood forest. So just for a moment, think about what that looked like, what that felt like, the sounds. I can only imagine that the redwood forest surrounding the Walala River was much the same 200 years ago, 250 years ago, when only the native people lived here. That began to change with expansion westward, and by 1864, the Walala Lumber Company was founded, and they in turn founded the town. I've got a slide up to show you. This is from 1892, and if you take a look at it, that bridge is the original Old State Highway bridge that would be located about behind the Arts Center. A couple of things to note: although those aren't ships, they're fairly sizable boats this far up the river. So that tells you what the river was like then. And by now they've built a railway, the Walala River Railroad it was called, to haul logs from deeper up the river. And that was the widest gauge locomotive operating on the West Coast at the time. Now, when they began doing that, that meant that they could stop dragging logs down the river as they had initially. So there was an original mill down in Mill Bend, which burned, and then they built another one up on the North Fork, is what I've read. That one burned too, and then by 1906, next slide, please. And to respond to the demand for timber, for lumber after the 1906 earthquake, they built a state-of-the-art mill right on what we now call Mill Bend. And this mill operated the first triple blade circular saw in the whole country. So again, we were out front with the timber industry at that point. Go to the next slide, please. So logging continued the milling continued, logging continues today, but the milling continued on Mill Bend. This is what we now know we call the lower mill. And I think that might be because the 1905 mill was upriver quite a ways. You might recognize this as Walala. If you look near the top of the photograph, there's a line of trees that meets up with now Highway 1, has been moved and is running parallel to the river at this point. So that's probably Old State Road right there south of that line of trees. North, you can see the tiny village of Olalla at the time, but it was there. And then if you look at the rest of the photograph, the only word that I can use on this is that it's devastated from years of industry. So I'm going to go now to the next slide. So many of us in the community were very excited when in the fall of 17, 112, 113 acres known as Mill Bend today was placed for sale. Now, this isn't the first sign I saw. It was the one at the Caltrans pullout. And my first thought was, I wonder if the community would be interested in trying to own this property. What an opportunity. It's the first time it had been offered separately for more than 60 years. It was offered up in the deal in 2015 when the Edmonds family sold to the Birch family and it became GRT. But Mill Bend at that point, this 113 acres didn't have a lot of timber value to it, so it was excluded. That turned out to be a really good thing for the community. So we said, let's ask the community what they think. Could I have the next slide, please? Some of you may have been at that very first forum in November of 2017. It was a cold night at the community center, and more than 70 people showed up, and we asked the question, what about this? Is this an opportunity the community is interested in? The community was overwhelmingly supportive of the community owning the land, increasing access, preserving it, and protecting it. Based on that, members of the Friends of Walala River and RCLC formed the Mill Bend Coalition. The coalition remained active into 2018. And lots of people worked on it really hard. And 2 years later, we had a couple more forums to announce that our conservation buyer, the Alamo Foundation, had stepped up and purchased the property and would hold it for us for up to 2 years. Now, it took 2 years to get there, but for a project this size and complexity, that was really moving at breakneck speed. We had our next virtual forum, our first virtual forum last August, to tell you what we were thinking about what should happen with the property and to ask your input for what you thought about that. Immediately after the forum for the month of September, we had a survey open online and more than 200 people stepped up and took that survey. I'll be talking about those results in just a moment. Could we have the next slide, please? So there we are in 2021 now, 26 months from the time that we began the effort. We now own RCLC and the community owns Mill Bend. I want to say thank you to a number of people here. I'd like to thank GMAC for sponsoring that very first forum and allowing the community to come out and weigh in. All the people in the Mill Bend Coalition who worked so hard. Again, Fogger and RCLC. By the middle of 2018, a leader locomotive had emerged, and you've heard the name Kathleen Chasey a number of times. And she certainly has a large portion of the responsibility for getting this done. Thank you, Kathleen. She was there from the beginning. She helped facilitate that very first meeting. There's somebody else I want to acknowledge who often doesn't get acknowledged, and that's Lori Mueller, our immediate past president for RCLC. Lori was right by Kathleen's side through that whole push, and typically in the background, as Lori tends to be, but she was there and pushing really hard. Cindy Kennedy, again, what a negotiation this was. Thank you, Cindy. And as Tina pointed out, the community really did this. The community made this happen. Without the support of the community, the coalition would not have formed. Without the support of the community, the funders would not have been quite as enthusiastic about this. So thanks to the community. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the survey results and spend a moment telling you what the community thought about our first presentation. Go to the next slide, please. So again, 196 people responded. 73% said they were full-time residents, 25 part-time residents. So we can say that this is a representative sampling from our community. These are local people. We asked what the top priority was. Salmonid restoration by far came out to be the top priority, followed closely by finishing that link in the coastal trail between the Walla Bluff Trail across the river to the trail where it begins in Sonoma County. Throughout this, they wanted access, and they meant access in a number of ways. Not only do they want trails, but they want access for those with mobility challenges. They want access to be, with the trails to be connected. They want connectivity to the trail systems that are close by. But they also want to protect the property. They were very clear that they want this property preserved. They were expressed an interest in interpretive science, not only for the biota, but for the culture, for the geology, and for the timber industry that had been here for so many years. They want, people said they want amenities, they want picnic tables and benches, but they were very clear to place, they want us to place those carefully so we don't lead to trashing the environment. And they want continued access to the paddle sports. Go ahead to the next slide, please. The overriding message in this from the survey participants was, let's not love it to death. Find the balance between human use and the environment that is so precious. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So this turns out to be a win for the community and the environment. Not only are we going to provide access, but we're going to protect this very fragile environment. And luckily, that's exactly what our funders want us to do. So here we are. This is a shot of Mill Bend recently, an aerial shot. And you can see there's a lot of green on it. That's a little bit deceptive, as you'll learn in the next presenters, from the next presenters. But you'll see those are willow flats, wetlands down there in Mill Bend. So a lot of it has come back well, but there's a lot to be done, as we've said. And one of the people who's going to be most responsible, along with Dave, is Jim Nybakken, who's head of our stewardship committee. And I'm going to turn this over to him so we can pour down deeper. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for attending the forum this afternoon. It was instructive to see those historic slides from that John put up on the screen, just to see the condition of the site so many years ago. And I'd like to talk about some of the stewardship efforts that are ongoing now and some of the challenges that we're facing. Starting at the next slide, please. Starting with the lower Mill Bend, this is an image from last summer that shows someone who drove their RV right onto the river beach. And this is an RV that after the tide came in had to actually be towed out from the water to get it off the site. Rather dramatic. Next slide, please. In any event, the repeated vehicle access to the river bar and the river itself has had the unfortunate effect of damaging habitat both in and out of the water. Next slide, please. To deal with that issue, we've installed a gate at the river bar to control unauthorized vehicle access. As you can see on the left-hand side of this picture, there's a gap that allows unlimited access for pedestrians who are also able to carry kayaks, canoes, and other small watercraft down to the river. During the winter months, drift boaters can also have access to the river for removal of their boats. And during the summer months, kayaks and canoes can be rented on site through the concessionaire currently operating there, which is Adventure Rents. Next slide, please. This shows the access road to the kayak launch place on the river bar. And as you can see, we do have some issues with that road. This is the road that leads down from Highway 1. Coastal Commission does limit the amount of work that can be done on this in this biologically sensitive area And that means that the road repairs are likely to need to be done every year or two to keep it up to safe access conditions. Next slide, please. And this just shows what happens during a somewhat more normal year when we have substantial rainfall. This is an image from 3 years ago when much of the site was underwater. So anything permanently located in this zone needs to be able to withstand periodic flooding. Next slide, please. Moving to the upland site, we have a number of other conditions that need to be dealt with. The landscape changes dramatically, and the challenges do as well. And this lists some of the elements that we're dealing with in the upland area of the site. Next slide, please. There have been a major effort over the last several months to clean up numerous campsites and containing abandoned trash in this area. And this is just 2 examples of sites that are located there, or were located there. These have since been cleaned up. Next slide, please. Several areas of the site also have remnants of long ago abandoned vehicles. And as you might guess, these are going to be very difficult to get off the site because they're deep in the forest. Next slide, please. Scattered throughout the site, we have some extensive areas of invasive plants. And these are just 3 examples. On the left, you can see pampas grass, upper right, French broom, and the bottom, fennel. These are all invasives and ones that we're trying to remove from the site. Next slide, please. One of the most noxious and fast-growing plants is pampas grass, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. The pampas grass is, forms in large masses. It displaces native plants and destroys habitat. And we've been trying to avoid the use of herbicides, so removing pampas grasses has been a challenge. Best done in the wintertime when the ground is wet and they're more easy to remove. But it's a big effort. Next slide, please. In order to do that, we've had the help from numerous volunteers working in the volunteer work days. And typically these are scheduled once a month. Much has been done in the last 6 months with trash cleanup, invasive plant removal, site maintenance and repairs, and cleaning up pathways for future interpretive trails. By the way, next Saturday, April 17th, is our next scheduled work day, and we encourage you to sign up to come help and sign up at the rclc.org website. Next slide, please. A lot of the invasives that we've taken out over the last 6 months have been accumulated through this volunteer effort and put into a large burn pile. And just last Thursday, too late to include pictures of that in this slide presentation, we had a big burn, which was able to remove most of the pile shown here, although we had to stop when the wind came up. I would like to give a big shout out now to all the volunteer burners who are shown here who worked on this, as well as the South Coast Fire and the North Sonoma Coast Fire for all of the help that they provided in coordinating this effort. Next slide, please. One of the true community treasures on the site is the historic cemetery. The 2 images shown here show the condition of the site before and after there had been some cleanup done. Prior to the cleanup, many of these grave sites were overgrown and lost from view, and now they're wonderfully obvious and apparent there for people to go through and take a look at to see many of the residents of the site of this area back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Next slide, please. In terms of the cemetery renovation, on the left-hand side, you can see some of the old picket fencing that remained on site, and that has been restored and reused so that it now provides the perimeter fencing for about 1/3 of the site. We are in process of installing new cedar thicket fencing around the remainder of the perimeter. And in the top right-hand photo, you can see the original Walla Cemetery sign that Butch Anderson, shown on the left side of that picture, stored faithfully in his warehouse for the last several decades. It will be reinstalled on the gate post that you see in the bottom picture on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. We do have a couple of buildings on site, both with extensive maintenance and repair needs. The building on the left will be used for a small office and meeting space. The building on the right is in rather poorer condition and is only suitable for use as a workshop or storage space at this point. Next slide, please. We do have many volunteer needs in our stewardship efforts, and this lists just some of them. We do site monitoring on the mill van property every week. As I mentioned before, we have monthly work days. We have building repairs that need to be done. We'd like to have some consultation from somebody who's expert in invasive plant management. Of course, communications, outreach, and fundraising, land use attorney, graphic design, and grant writing are all important things that we could use your help in. Anyone who could provide help with one or more of these activities should contact our esteemed volunteer coordinator, Cheryl Harris, through the RCLC.org website. Next slide, please. So I'd like to give thanks, but there are so many people who have been involved with all of these stewardship efforts that we don't have time to name them all here. So we just offer an enthusiastic thank you to all those who have participated over the last 6 months. Having said that, though, I would like to recognize those who have been involved with the cemetery restoration project, in which such tremendous progress has been made in the last several months. So here's a big shout out to Kay Martin, who's headed the effort, as well as to the Walla Lions Club, the Point Arena Druids, and the Sea Ranch Hotshots for all their contributions toward restoring this historic part of our community. Another project that's so obvious in terms of its need and desirability that we're already proceeding with it is the development of an interpretive trail on the upland site. This is a project that's being led by the talented and hardworking team of volunteer Laura Baker and our intern Elise Allen. And to tell us more about this effort, I'd now like to turn over the presentation to Elise Allen. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jim. So today I'm going to be talking about the Upland Forest ADA Accessible Nature Trail and its interpretations. Next slide, please. Before I begin, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Elise Allen. I was born and raised in Gualala, and right now I'm in my 4th year at UC Berkeley, double majoring in marine science and ecosystem management and forestry. And I'm super excited to be a part of this project. I'd always wondered about the upland site, and now I'm really excited to open it to the public. I also want to give a couple thank yous. First and foremost to Laura Baker, my partner in crime. She has been such a joy to work with, and I've learned so much from her, so thank you so much, Laura. I also want to thank Gary Shannon and Vince Zarkowski for their help with the physical planning of the trail. They're trail planning professionals, and their expertise has been invaluable, so thank you, Gary and Vince. I also want to thank the Millbend Working Group. Their tireless hours removing invasive species and cleaning up the site have really helped, and we couldn't have done it without them. So thank you to the Millbend Working Group. Next slide, please. So in addition to doing the actual physical planning of the trail, Laura and I are tasked with coming up with interpretive material for trail users to interact with. And as we began to think of this material, we were really struck with how dynamic this site is. There is so much going on with interactions between past disturbances and the natural ecosystem. And so our goal is to interpret how these have interacted with each other over time by exploring geological, anthropogenic, or man-made cultural changes throughout time, and focusing on ongoing natural restoration and future conservation. We've also been struck with how this site is kind of a paradox. There are really deeply disturbed areas from the history of the site that are kind of competing with really sensitive natural resources. And that's something that we wanted to highlight. Next slide, please. So we want to start at the beginning and look at some geological interpretations. Here we've consulted with subject matter experts. Local geologist Tom Cochran has given us his expertise here, so thank you, Tom. We also want to explore some historical interpretations. And here we want to look at the Indigenous land use history of the site and provide an Indigenous land acknowledgement so that trail users know whose ancestral site they are walking on. And here we really need the help and advice of the Pomo community in telling the story of this beautiful land. RCLC has reached out to the local Kashaya people to seek out representatives for this. And as the initial trail planning takes shape, we would really like their participation and involvement in this. We also want to explore the history of anthropogenic or man-made disturbances and the industrial extraction of resources like timber. Next slide, please. So when we focus on disturbance, we can really see exactly what that disturbance did to the landscape by looking at all these invasive species monocultures that have been created. And these monocultures are very, very problematic because they really reduce the overall biodiversity of the ecosystem and the ecosystem health as a whole. Next slide, please. But this site is extremely resilient, and we are seeing ongoing natural restoration facilitated by the process of succession with pioneer species moving in. Next slide, please. Another component of this really dynamic landscape is the diverse vegetation communities that you can see. You can see the succession or zonation of different ecosystems as you move inland from the coast. And you can also see the ecotones or edges between these different vegetation types very clearly as you're walking through the trail. Next slide, please. So as you walk on the trail, you're going to be exploring and following the convergences of these vegetation communities that include, but are not limited to, coastal scrub, bishop pine forest, mixed conifer forest, and redwood forest. And ways that we might interpret these really dynamic features is using plant tags or more specific species interpretations, as well as ethnobotanical interpretations. Next slide, please. Here are just a few examples of ethnobotanical interpretations, and here we will consult with subject matter experts on plants or plant medicine, as well as the local Indigenous community. Next slide, please. We also have a huge opportunity to look at the wildlife on this site. As you can see, I've included 2 pictures of dusky-footed wood rat nests. And these nests are all over the site, which is really amazing given how hammered it's been, because the dusky-footed wood rats are keystone species, and they bring in the northern spotted owls, serving as one of their prey items, as well as provide habitat for newts and salamanders, like the California giant salamander, which we've seen on the site, which is very exciting and very promising. Next slide, please. So as I close, I really want to stress that this is a huge opportunity for the future and that you, the public, will be playing an active role in the conservation and restoration of this site. We also hope that this will cultivate a greater appreciation, not only for the ecological wonders that are here, but also for the really rich historical features that are on the site. I've included a picture of fringed false hellebore, also known as fringed corn lily, which is one of my favorite sensitive California endemic plants that likes to grow in marshy wetland sites, and it can be seen on the redwood portions of the trail. So I'm really excited to share this with you, and I think it's really exciting for the future. So thank you, and I'll hand it off to Dave.
Thank you, Elise. What a great description of your early work on first steps into the property. Next slide. Thank you, Joan. As we've heard now from John, there's been a long and complex history, and from Jim, a tremendous generous efforts and contributions to acquire, care for, and invest the community in the Millbend Preserve. And Elise and Laura's and Gary and insightful considerations for the first steps toward public access and interpretive experiences. These are the cornerstones for comprehensive planning for the future of this amazing place. I'll give you a quick overview of the planning methodology and then hand the microphone over to Joan, Lauren, and Maggie for them to take you through the alternatives that we're currently considering for access and conservation. Next slide, please. But before beginning, I do have to take a moment and recognize the Coastal Conservancy as our primary advocate, our guide, as well as our generous funder for this planning undertaking. This undertaking could not have really begun without partnership with the Conservancy and the leadership and support of Lisa Ames, the grant manager. We also are fortunate to be assisted by a number of agencies, organizations, and individuals in the North Coast region as the planning alternatives have been developed and refined. We've received input, technical input from the Coastal Conservancy and the Coastal Commission, Friends of Wallala River, Sonoma County Regional Parks, the Sonoma Land Trust, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, Mendocino County Planning Department, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Caltrans District 1 staff, and California Department of Parks and Recreation. So many, many thanks again to our partners and our leaders in this planning process. So very quickly in methodology, we begin first to understand what's on the ground, who lives there, and how it's used by wildlife and plants. Next slide. We also survey what's come before us to understand the relative range of resources, both pre-European and post-European occupancy. This, as John mentioned, is a part of the coast that was very regularly occupied or visited by the Pomo tribes, and they continue to have an interest in the property today. In addition to cultural resource values, we also have to understand the nature of the ground itself. How steep is it? Is it eroding? What's its relative stability, and is it subject to inundation as a result of climate change? Next slide, please. And once we understand what has come before this property and its history, and then what's there today, we can understand and have assessed relative sensitivity of resources to varying types of management and change on the site. Next slide. That relative sensitivity informs the evaluation of management requirements. Next slide. And also helps us identify, keep on going, helps us identify opportunities for resource. Boy, we're having some delay in the slides. I apologize. Previous slide, Joan, with the fish. Once we understand management sensitivities, we're able to identify opportunities for recovery, such as for salmonid habitat, which is a primary resource objective of the planning process. With all of that information in hand, next slide, please. The planning process began or continued with a establishment of a set of priorities. These priorities accrue from the various interactions between the property and our funders, characteristics of the land, such as its topography and its relative stability, the fact that we are in the midst of climate change that affects both the aquatic setting as well as the upland wildfire conditions. We have to be very cognizant of and care for cultural and historic features. Whatever happens on this property, however the planning process moves forward, actions ultimately will depend upon the kind of money that the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy would pursue for grants to accomplish work and to keep that work in shape. The community's needs are very close to front and center as the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy considers its capacity and its ability to implement work in the future. Next slide. And we use a set of criteria to benchmark the definition of alternatives and the evaluation of those alternatives, and ultimately leading the board of directors to making a decision about a preferred alternative for the future plan. And you can see here 5 different points, but very briefly, one of the things that the board needs to make sure that it avoids to the extent it can is that actions that take place on the property should avoid or minimize unintended environmental impact consequences. Some actions are going to be harder to accomplish than others. And oftentimes, one of the heaviest lifts in getting things done on a property, particularly in the coastal zone, as many of you are aware, are regulatory complexities and the level of effort needed to accomplish regulatory permits and other approvals. All of this accrues to cost to implement. And it isn't just having the resources, the money to build something or to restore something. The Redwood Coastline Conservancy and its partners have to have the resources to keep, to maintain, to operate, and ultimately to repair improvements on the property and restoration efforts on the property as those improvements go through their life cycle. And again, as mentioned earlier, we have to be cognizant of changes in the environment that are in constant flux. The what is known about climate change is, again, a growing and changing science and a body of information. And it affects not just flooding in the lower part of the property, as you saw on the slide from Jim's segment, but also affects the upland area where extensive vegetation is subject to wildfire risk. Next slide, please. We are in the midst of accomplishing this work, which began last year, and you were many of you were part of our process kickoff in the August forum. We have defined a range of alternatives. You'll hear about them today from Joan, Lauren, and Maggie. And we're moving forward to a selection of a preferred alternative that can then be used to do initial design for a pilot project and complete all the bits and parts and pieces of a comprehensive plan that will also lay out the sequence of effort and investment in the decades to come. Later on this year, we will complete the integrated conservation plan and bring that plan back to you in another forum sometime in the October timeframe. Next slide, please. And now I'd like to hand the mic over to Joan Schwan, again, project manager with Prunuske Chatham, to take us all through a overview of a number of important study elements in the project, and then a description of the work in progress and alternatives.
Thanks, Dave. So just by way of introduction, I am the lead ecologist at Prunuske Chatham, and PCI is an environmental science, planning, design, and construction firm in Sebastopol. So we are thrilled to be involved on this project and working with RCLC. We want to talk today, Laura, Maggie, and I want to talk to you about a few of the elements of the conservation plan that we'll be working on, that we are working on with RCLC. This isn't everything that will be part of that plan, but these are the parts that we are ready to share with you. First, I'll go briefly over the ecological setting and cultural resources. You've heard bits and pieces about that already, but I want to make sure everybody has it in mind, as those really set the stage, as Dave mentioned, for what can happen on the site, what its restoration opportunities are, and what really makes sense from a public access point of view. I'll talk briefly about some other physical site constraints, and then Lauren and I will move on to talk about restoration opportunities. And finally, with all of those things in mind, all of those pieces, the current ecological setting and the potential opportunities for enhancing the natural resources, that all provides the foundation for the public access piece, which Maggie will describe. So many of you, I imagine, know the site really well, but perhaps not everybody does. So here's an overview of the site, and let me get my little pointer here. So we're looking north, and at the front of the photo down here is Squala Point Regional Park in Sonoma County. So it's really fabulous, of course, to have that adjacent to the preserve. And at the far end of the photo is the town of Gualala. And so the preserve is here in between the two. And it includes the estuary. So the aquatic habitats and the gravel bars and the adjacent wetlands of the estuary. And then the willow wetlands, dense willow wetlands of the Mill Bend itself. This is what people think of when they talk about the mill bend proper, where the river bends and forms this, this piece of land between the highway and the estuary. Then as you move upstream, there's riparian forest along the river, this paler band of forest along here. And like Elise said, it's really, there are quite clear zones throughout the property of habitat as you change elevation. So as you go up, you come into Bishop Pine Forest. And then a little further in, you come to the third mill site, which you can see here is still this disturbed open area, along with this overflow parking area up here, shared with the Art Center. And then finally, you move up into the Redwood Forest in this portion of the property. And China Gulch, I wanted to point out too, is coming down here, draining from the hills up here and under the highway through a culvert. That's a perennial stream. So looking a little more closely at the plant communities on the property, the Redwood Forest and Bishop Pine Forest obviously are really in recovery, as others have described. And there are places within those forests that are really lovely, and there are some wetland areas within the Redwood Forest that support those rare plants that Elise mentioned. And then there are other areas where you can really see the history of disturbance, the disturbed soil that now supports broom and pampas grass and other invasive species like that. The riparian forest, there's some really lovely sections there that stay wet in portions of the year and support beautiful sedge bands. The willow thickets on Mill Bend, they're very dense, nearly impenetrable, very interesting habitat for wildlife. You can also see in that picture of the willow thickets, the disturbed gravel bar that was mentioned before, prior to RCLC's management of that area. And then there are wetlands along the edges of the estuary and around China Gulch. So lots of interesting habitats. And as Elise pointed out, they're really a mix of valuable native diverse habitats and highly disturbed. So it's an interesting, interesting balance between the two types of situations. And of course, all of those habitat types support a lot of common wildlife and a number of special status species as well. So there's steelhead in the estuary, very important and a focus of a lot of the reason this property was protected. Potential for coho in the watershed as well. There are records of California red-legged frog on the property. And there are also, as Elise mentioned, there's potential for northern spotted owl in the vicinity. And then many types of non-special status wildlife as well. Lots of mammals in the estuary, river otters, and lots of bird life, waterfowl in the estuary in a number of different parts of the property. This map tries to capture all of those different habitat types and sum them up in terms of what's considered sensitive. Many of those habitats are considered sensitive by regulatory agencies, and that's just a reminder that we need to consider them carefully when we're doing project planning. Even though they are disturbed and they're not the same intact, supporting the rich diversity that once was, they still have sensitive elements and still will require careful planning and working with the regulatory agencies as we go forward. And you can see the colored areas are those sensitive zones, and that really encompasses almost all of the site. So the areas that aren't included are those that are most heavily disturbed by that third mill location. And of course, we'll try to focus a lot of our public access elements for those areas. Cultural resources have already been mentioned, really important Native American history. Of course, it's a valuable place for resources historically, coming to the estuary seasonally to fish and to gather other food resources. The cemetery you've seen, the railroad line. There were residential areas associated with the mills and remnants of the third mill, but most of those, aside from the cemetery, all the rest of these are really just traces. There's not very much remaining that's visible. So those, they still need consideration in project planning, and they certainly present opportunities for interpretation. Moving on to site constraints, the big one is Highway 1 bisecting the property. So it really poses a challenge for moving across the site. You can see here, actually, as you first enter the property from the south, the highway speed is 55, and then it transitions to 40 as you come north. And then once you get into town, it moves down to 25. So clearly it's not an easy crossing to make. You can do it if you're quick and you're very cautious, but that's an important piece that we're looking at with RCLC, and we'll of course need Caltrans involvement to think about how to enable people to get across. And of course, Caltrans has a right-of-way that includes the road as well as a band beyond it. So a lot of collaboration will be needed as RCLC works on that area in terms of anything from invasive species management to trail planning. This map shows the disturbed soils from that old mill use. There has been work done analyzing the soils, as is typical after long use as a mill site. There are some traces of contamination. It's very low, but nonetheless, we'll want to do our best to avoid deep subsurface excavation in any of those areas, and think about uses that really fit in those settings that can avoid that deep disturbance, and also maybe even are able to cap or close off those soils. Here's a topographic view of the site. The gray lines are elevation bands, and the blue area is elevations below 20 feet. That is the zone that typically floods on an annual basis or so. So those areas, of course, are likely to flood more frequently and more deeply as storm surges increase, as we continue to change our climate. Caltrans has also called out this purple area, the portion of their facilities, as being vulnerable to storm surge from flooding from storm surges, as well as long-term sea level rise. Then there's steep areas on the property. These bands where the lines are close together and the color is darker gray are steep. So there's some potential for erosion and just some challenges in terms of public access considerations. This point here is steep and a very narrow point in the property on the west side. And you can see up here as well, it's quite steep. There's an informal trail extending along here, sort of, but it's got slides crossing the trail that make it impassable. So that needs some planning and some work. There's also some possible unstable soil in this region where sawdust was dumped historically. So those are a few of the site constraints considerations. So with all of that in mind, now we turn our attention to the future and thinking about restoration opportunities. There's a few opportunities in the uplands and then some really important estuary opportunities. In the uplands, this map shows the yellow areas, the yellow stripes are major stands of invasives, and the green areas are high priority restoration areas. So this up here is an area that was part of the old mill site, the residential area and other portions of the third mill site. And Caltrans is working with RCLC to look at the possibility of a major restoration of Bishop Pine in that area. Right now it's weedy grassland open area. So that would really restore a lot of ecological value up there. And then we're looking at this third mill site and the potential for restoration of that area. And I'll show you more about that in a moment, but also just want to call out these other areas where there are major stands of invasive species, which Jim and others are obviously well on their way to working on, but also would benefit from further restoration. So looking closer at the mill site restoration, I know this is, don't try to read these labels over here. This is just a view from our draft plan of the existing conditions. So some of the elements, well, actually first, just a view on this side of the existing conditions. You can see there's asphalt and there's concrete remnants. It's very weedy. Lots of pampas grass, lots of fennel, not very high in habitat value or aesthetic values. So over here are proposed actions. This area is the overflow parking area that's shared with the Art Center, and that will continue. But we're looking at installing redwoods and other native understory species throughout the parking to help screen it and to improve its habitat value. This gray area is a band of asphalt, which could potentially be removed during restoration. There's also concrete down here, which could potentially also be removed. And then throughout this lower area, there are varying degrees, varying densities of invasive species that would need removal. And there's a lot of challenges here, a lot of considerations from the soil issues themselves to the seed bank of non-native species to handle. But there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of recovery. This area especially has already recovered quite a bit and has a lot of native scrub species in it. And we see potential for restoring stands of native bishop pine forest species, coastal scrub, and grassland in this area. With that, I will turn it over to Lauren.
Good afternoon, everyone. To introduce myself, I am a fluvial geomorphologist with Prunuske Chatham. I've been working at PCI for nearly 20 years, mostly on the North Coast here, doing habitat restoration for salmonids, both assessment, started out doing watershed planning, moved into sort of the science of restoration, and now I actually help design and construct projects. So I've been focusing most recently on estuaries. So I'm very excited to be working on the Gualala because we've got projects going on in the Garcia, Salmon Creek, and others up and down the coast. So excited to be focused on the Gualala for a while. So one of the first things I want to do, since we haven't talked much about the estuary, is let you know what salmonids need in estuaries. In terms of restoration, they haven't been a huge focus for salmonid recovery until recently. They're just complex, and we really have been focusing on upland river stretches, but the reality is that estuaries are critical for all life stages of salmonids. Most of us just think about the adults coming in because they're who we can see, and we've been fishing them for generations, and we can see these huge, beautiful fish like the photo that Dave had up earlier. So we think about estuaries for the adults coming in and the timing of the bar breaching and all of that. But the really critical piece of the salmonid life stage is really for the juveniles. So all juvenile salmonids, whether they're steelhead or coho or chinook, have to utilize the estuary for a period of time. Some come down and spend most of their life in the estuary, or they can, or some of them just migrate down in the spring, right about now when they're going to smolt, which is the transition from them being a freshwater species to an ocean-going species. And they really need the estuary to do that physiological transition. All sorts of changes occur in their body in order for them to go out to sea and be in ocean water instead of fresh water. And so what these juveniles need is a little bit different than what adults need. Adults need big, deep pools with wood for cover, like we see in that upper photo. But what juveniles need are, I mean, they're small. They need to be protected from predators. There's a lot of predators out there in the estuary. Naturally, of course, we've got otter, we've got piscivorous birds like cormorants and osprey and pelicans. Yeah, this is what they eat, but those fish need some place to hide from them. And so when I look at an estuary, I'm really looking for those nooks and crannies that these little fish can inhabit, whether that's emergent wetland vegetation or whether it's log jams with emergent vegetation off to the side, or whether it's these inlets like at China Gulch, which provide some cover for them to move into. And they need it at all stages. As you are probably all aware, the bar the sandbar fills in the summer, the elevations of the water increase. The water levels within an estuary vary dramatically, both seasonally and sometimes from week to week in the winter, depending on whether we've got large flood events. So these fish are in the estuary at all times, trying to rear and really bulk up in size before they head out to the ocean. This is one of their prime feeding locations. There's a lot of food nutrients that comes in from the ocean. It's a place for them to grow and be protected before they head out to the ocean. And there's been studies recently that the larger the fish can grow, the more resources they can get in the estuary, the larger they are, and thus the more likely they are to survive ocean conditions and return as adults in several years. And this holds true for steelhead or coho and probably Chinook. So what I'm really looking for is what sort of habitat is out there now. And next slide, please, Joan. So we heard a lot from the previous presenters and RCLC board members about the history of this site. And when we look at it right now, it looks really sort of wild and natural and beautiful. But remember those old photos back from around 1900 when he had mills sitting here on that flat, on that willow covered flat called the Mill Bend. That's all covered now in willow, but what was there before and what was there in most of the estuary were these low-lying vegetated tidal wetlands. That flat has now been elevated significantly. That's how they built mills, was they built those wooden cribs. They piled gravel on top of it. They elevated the wetlands, filled wetlands. That's what we did for a lot of our early 1800s and 1900s time, is filled wetlands to create land for operations. So that only floods maybe once a year, probably not every year, and only for a short period of time. So now what we have is definitely a modified estuary without a lot of those little nooks and crannies and little wetlands and overhanging vegetation for the juvenile salmonids that they would need, and very little wood. One of the first things that timber harvesters did when they came into an area like Wallala is to take all the wood that was in the estuary. That was easy pickings. Huge trees that were downed and log jams. They cleared out the estuaries first, one, because it was easy pickings, and two, because they were great big logs, and then they opened them up so that they could then use the estuary to store logs that they were bringing down from upstream. So we don't have those wood features now. So I just was out in the estuary kayaking around last weekend, and really these are the only sites that has, somewhat marginal habitat for juveniles. Next slide, please, Joan. Actually, can you go back to that one real quick? Sorry, there was another piece that I wanted to relay to everybody. The big gravel bars that you see out there now, and they're just really a dramatic feature of the Wallala estuary, aren't really what would have been there back in the 1900s or 1800s. Those gravel bars have grown in the last several decades to a half century. And they're really a result of upland land uses. It's what we call legacy sediment coming in from previous channel clearing, removing log jams, and lots of upland timber harvesting. Timber harvesting done under historic methods, not necessarily how it's done now, but back in the 40s and 50s when we did clear cutting, a lot of legacy sediment coming down from there. So what it does is it fills in our pools and it creates just hot, dry areas that these juvenile salmon can't persist in, and it fills in their pools that they need, and there's no wood for them to shelter in. So when you see these big gravel bars, just know that that's not really what historically was there, and it's somewhat detrimental to juvenile salmonid, as well as upstream migration of adult fish. Okay, next slide. So we're starting under this conservation planning, we're starting to look at estuary enhancement opportunities for salmon, steelhead, and coho within the Mill Bend site. And we're doing a preliminary assessment of this. Right now, as we currently speak, literally, I've been typing away. Dave and the RCLC board and PCI are putting in applications to do a much more thorough assessment and planning and actually design process for improving salmonid habitat and seeing what our options are, and hopefully developing a project that could be implemented in the next 4 to 5 years as a jumpstart to that #1 priority that the community had. So right now, what we're looking at is how do we deal with these big gravel bars? One of the things that we do for habitat enhancement is install what we call large wood structures or engineered log jams to really redefine channels, dig pools, provide that shelter habitat for the fish. There's also ways that we could look at creating flooded wetlands that are more accessible to fish and more productive for food sources for them over a wider range of flows, perhaps in the Mill Bend reach or on that flat, or look at enhancements to, say, the Green China Gulch Inlet. So there's a whole suite of things that we can look at and approaches that can be used to improve conditions in the estuary, and we'll be doing that, fingers crossed, if we get funded over the next few years. So at this point, that's what I've got to say. I'm sure we'll be talking to everybody about this more in the future, but now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Maggie Jensen to talk about public access and all the ways that it has to, fit in with the restoration goals.
Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maggie Jensen, and I'm a landscape architect with Prunuske Chatham, here to present some of the conceptual designs for public access that we've been working on in collaboration with RCLC. And we're going to get started with some of the goals for the project. These include protecting and enhancing the site's rich resources as our #1 goal, facilitating responsible enjoyment of the site's special qualities where compatible with the resource goals, coastal trail connections, connecting to the Gualala Bluff Trail to the north and facilitating connection to the Regional Parks Trail to the south, and providing a broad range of access and recreational opportunities that complement both the existing and future opportunities. Next slide, please. So the conceptual designs for public access are based on the following: the site's sensitive resources and special values and priorities for restoration. Physical constraints, we've seen Highway 1 as it bisects the site is one of the main physical constraints. Input from the community about desired access opportunities. We had input one member of the community had asked for a bridge that crossed the Gualala River, pedestrian footbridge. Funder requirements, RCLC's capacity, and then also input from a technical working group of regional leaders in park planning, regulatory compliance, and land stewardship. So RCLC and PCI have developed 2 public access alternatives, one with a lighter touch, and then one with which is proposing a little bit more development. Next slide. These alternatives are concepts, and they will require further study and evaluation before moving forward. Further evaluation includes potential environmental impacts, costs to build and maintain, level of effort to acquire permits, degree of RCLC control and reliance on other landowners. These would include Caltrans and Sonoma County Regional Parks as neighbors. Resilience to climate change and flooding, and then RCLC's philosophy and capacity. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we're looking at a site overview. This slide, as you can see, the site is large and diverse with different habitat types, which is really exciting. It's very, very exciting. One of the biggest constraints that we've discussed is Highway 1, which bisects the site. The green lines that you're looking at indicate RCLC property boundaries. And the highway, you can see there's a break in the RCLC property line. That's the right-of-way, Caltrans right-of-way for Highway 1. So basic overview for orientation is as follows. We have the town of Gualala and the Coastal Bluff Trail to the north, Gualala Arts Center, the old mill site, Sonoma County Regional Parks campground, and then the California Coastal Trail to the south, Highway 1 bridge over the river, Mill Bend, and then 2 existing parking areas that are located off Highway 1. For ease of interpretation, we've broken down the site into 4 zones, each with a different user experience. These include town, the North Forest, the mill site, and Mill Bend. So the first site that we're going to explore today is town. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the town access alternative 1, which is showing the lighter touch approach for public access near the town of Gualala. A couple of things to note. All of the proposed designs shown today are conceptual, and further study will be required before final designs can be determined. The dashed orange lines that you see represent existing trails, and the solid orange lines represent proposed trails. And as discussed, the green is RCLC's property boundary. This particular design envisions complete connection of the California Coastal Trail along Route 1 in the Caltrans right-of-way, as seen with the thick dashed yellow line, connecting the Coastal Bluff Trail to the north with Parks Trail to the south. It's important to note that this proposed pedestrian and bicycle trail is located outside RCLC's property and would need to be implemented by Caltrans in coordination with RCLC. It's a long-term option and challenging to install. It's costly, relies on other partners to implement, but it is a valuable coastal trail connection. In addition, Caltrans right-of-way is narrow, as I'm sure many of you know who have ever driven through this, driven on this section of highway. Some sections are very steep, which would require cantilevering a path or constructing possibly on the east side of the highway. All of this pens further study. The other features shown include connecting the dead end of the California Coastal Bluff Trail to the new parking area on Highway 1. It would include a series of steps up the bluff and 2 picnic areas south of the View restaurant, both with spectacular views. It goes without saying that the views anywhere on the preserve are absolutely fabulous. One on a low terrace, which is removed from the highway's noise and traffic, and another at an elevation closer to the highway where native vegetation would be used for screening. Both areas will include picnic tables and interpretive signage. Interpretive elements for the entire site include logging and mill history, the China Gulch residential area, the historic railroad, Native American history, and the rich estuary and forest ecology. You can see a smaller, more private viewing area is proposed to the south. This trail, this connection to the California Coastal Bluff Trail up to the new parking is relatively low cost and less challenging for RCLC to implement. So you can see there are 3 proposed crosswalks facilitating access to the upland portions of the site. These would be implemented by Caltrans in collaboration with RCLC. And considerations for all crossings include safety features such as reduced speeds and flashing lights. Lastly, there's an additional trail. So you can see it utilizes an old railroad grade on the knoll just south of China Gulch, leading to a picnic area by a large cypress tree. Note this alternative would require crossing the highway twice to access the knoll trail and picnic area. But this trail is also low cost, less challenging, and also within RCLC's purview. Next slide, please. So this slide shows town access alternative 2, the slightly more developed option. This option also envisions complete connection of the California Coastal Trail through the site, but this trail is located further away from Highway 1, further west, with an enhanced coastal and estuary experience. The proposed trail follows the old railroad alignment, which we're referring to as rails to trails. Features include a suspension bridge, shown in purple, terraced pathways and boardwalks that lead all the way to the Mill Bend site. Needless to say, this option is somewhat more challenging, costly, and does rely on other partners to implement. But it's a way to provide important connectivity with nice coastal views and definitely an enhanced estuary experience located on the west side of Highway 1. The suspension bridge connects the 2 picnic areas without the need to cross the highway. This is a long-range and expensive plan. A single crosswalk provides access to the upland portions of the site. The other difference on this plan, as you can see, instead of stairs connecting the California Coastal Bluff Trail to the upper parking area, we're proposing switchbacks for increased accessibility. Next slide, please. This is an example of a favorite suspension bridge located in Nevada City and its abutments. And here's another example of a suspension bridge, similar in style to what we would envision for the proposed crossing over China Gulch. Next slide. Okay, now we're entering a different zone. This is the upland portion of the site, the North Forest. This is the lighter touch of the 2 alternatives. Vehicular access to the upland portion is proposed via Old Stage Road and an existing gravel access road on the preserve. A parking lot is proposed on the coastal bluff in an existing disturbed area, which could be screened with native vegetation to minimize visual impacts. A permanent restroom is proposed at the parking area, and there would also be a trailhead with visitor maps and signage. ADA parking is proposed a little closer towards the central portion of the site. A bluff trail with views would create an accessible loop to the Pioneer Cemetery and continue through the forest along a nature trail with forest interpretation and activity areas. The loop completes itself back at the parking. Should one choose to explore more of the site, a bigger loop is proposed around the cemetery, past the mill site interpretive displays that would be proposed to set on the old concrete foundations, through a vegetated overflow parking which serves Gualala Arts Center, and then through the forest. Trail alignments would use existing social trails where possible, and with an effort to minimize impacts to natural resources. A new entrance is already underway for the historic cemetery, in addition to an education and research center housed in the existing buildings, where an additional restroom and picnic area are proposed. The North Forest trails are low to moderate level of effort to build and minimize impacts to sensitive resources while providing accessible trails. As you can see, the yellow dashed line continues to the south, and this again represents the bicycle and pedestrian path along Highway 1, which continues towards Mill Bend. Next slide. Okay, this is North Forest Alternative 2, which is the slightly more developed option. This alternative creates the same accessible objective as option 1, but provides a greater range of experiences both through the forest and on the bluff. Additions include a return access road for vehicles, as well as more extensive trails through the forest. This alternative proposes enhanced access, but note it will disturb more ground and cause more fragmentation of the forest. Note the California Coastal Connector Trail west of Highway 1 continues along heading towards Mill Bend, and in this reach would be composed of terraced walkways, because this is one of the very steep sections of the bluff. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're moving along through the site. Still in the upland portion, we're calling this the Mill Site Zone. This is the lighter touch alternative. And you can see this trail that connects the upper mill site down to the river and Mill Bend. The zone is accessible to vehicles from an existing parking area located along Highway 1 where a trailhead would be developed. The trail wraps around an open meadow and you get pretty serene views of the river throughout here. You could take a short loop back to the existing parking area or uplands, or continue walking to the north along a proposed trail through the Redwoods with river views that connects to Gualala Arts Center. The existing trail to the Arts Center, as you can see it shown with the dashed yellow line, follows the old state highway alignment. This zone also proposes a children's play meadow and an outdoor classroom. This alternative is relatively low cost and within RCLC's purview to construct. And then again, you can see that dashed yellow line continuing along Highway 1, which represents the bicycle and pedestrian path connecting to the south as it approaches the Highway 1 bridge. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the mill site again, and this is alternative 2. It's the slightly more developed option. So the main difference on this slide is what you see in purple crossing the river to the north is it's a proposed seasonal or permanent bridge that crosses the river, connecting to Regional Parks Campground and providing an important connection to the California Coastal Trail. The other difference that you can see on this particular alternative is increased accessibility around the meadow with switchbacks that have been cut up through the forest. So while this alternative provides enhanced access, especially across the river, it would require complex regulatory approvals, potential estuary enhancement plan conflicts, and would absolutely require readiness and collaboration with regional parks to implement. And needless to say, with the bridge, this option would be costly. Again, you can see the California Coast Connector Trail to the west of Highway 1, continuing onto the Mill Bend site in the form of an elevated boardwalk. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a seasonal pedestrian river crossing. That something like this is what's currently envisioned for that bridge that was shown in purple across Gualala River. Next slide. Now we enter the last zone. It's a lot of information, so thank you for keeping up. This is the Mill Bend site, and this is the lighter touch alternative. So you can see the existing dirt access road that comes down into the Mill Bend site towards the kayak rental. We saw some photos, deeply rutted. This road would certainly need to be improved in addition to parking improvements and a proposed seasonal restroom, which could be removed during the rainy season to avoid flooding impacts. The Mill Bend site provides access to the estuary, small craft boats, kayaks, which, you know, Lauren was out there last weekend and I'm looking forward to getting out myself and exploring. That's very valuable resource to the community that would be maintained. And a gate has been installed to access control onto Mill Bend and its gravel bars. What we're seeing in this option is a short boardwalk that's proposed through the willows on an old roadbed with a viewing platform for bird watching and other wildlife. There would be interpretive signs informing visitors about red-legged frogs and reminders to stay on the boardwalk. Railings may also be constructed to control visitor access in the sensitive resource area. Again, you see that yellow, thick yellow dashed line representing the Highway 1 bicycle and pedestrian trail continuing south towards Regional Parks Campground entrance. And this would provide a complete connection to the California Coastal Trail throughout the site. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the final alternative. This is the Mill Bend, slightly more developed alternative. As you can see, there's a longer boardwalk that goes all the way through the willows with a viewing area. And this provides an important opportunity to get from the estuary. Sorry, my cursor was on the wrong spot. So what you can see is a crossing under Highway 1, in addition to a boardwalk that goes through the sensitive alder forest. And this provides an important opportunity to get from the estuary to the upland portions of the site without having to cross Highway 1. So that's a really nice connection, which would be seasonal given how the site floods during the winter. This option provides more access, but is more costly and a little bit more challenging to implement. The longer boardwalk has clearly some more impacts to the willow wetland and sensitive wildlife area, and long-term effort to maintain would be more than the alternative that we previously looked at. Given the features are more ambitious, it does provide a continuous trail experience west of Highway 1 on the coastal and estuary side of the property and provides access to uplands and upriver without that need to cross Highway 1. Next slide. So this is an example of some trails and terrace walkways along coastal bluffs. Some of these images might look familiar to you who enjoy exploring the beautiful coast here in California. This is what you would see in some of those steep sections on the rails to trails alternative. Next slide. And then here we have some examples of boardwalks through sensitive habitat, one with railings and one without. And again, you would see these in the Mill Bend design alternatives. One with a shorter boardwalk, that's the lighter touch approach, and then one with the longer boardwalk that's elevated and then connects up to those terrace walkways through the steep sections. Next slide. Upper left, this is just a typical access road, similar to what you would find on the preserve. And then the bottom right shows a class 1 trail with bicycle and pedestrian use along Highway 1. So something would look somewhat similar to that. Okay, well, thank you. We're here for any questions. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dave.
Maggie, thank you so much for an excellent overview of very exciting range of alternatives in all 4 visitor quadrants of the 113 acres of the Mill Bend Preserve. You guys have done fabulous work, and we're really grateful for your partnership. Lauren, thanks to, and Joan for setting the stage for this exploration of alternatives for access with a really thorough understanding of opportunities and constraints that come from the history, both natural and cultural history of the property, and our potential for really crucial habitat restoration going forward. This is the time where we have a little bit of time, probably about 15 minutes at this point, to respond to questions that participants have typed into the chat space. Right at this point, I've got, let's see, a question from Mr. Pullman, P. McLean, Mr. Ivor, and Mr. Bay. I can read those questions and responses for the benefit of the group. Those I have typed some responses in the chat for people to read, but why don't I'll go ahead and lead off with those. I can also see a new question from that are coming in, and we'll catch up with those in just a sec. Beginning with Mr. Pullman, there has been so much past development, commercial operations, and building on the site. Are there still remnants of that activity evident on the site? And you heard earlier from Joan, who described really for the most part, what's left of previous industrial and residential development is essentially traces. We have a couple concrete building foundations. There are areas of old asphalt and concrete, likely roadways and other kinds of surfaces for industrial purposes. There is, of course, extensive areas of disturbed soils, which are also a remnant. Other locations, we know that there was a railroad operating on across much of the property, and the topography represents some of that old rail bed. However, there really isn't much left of those old uses on the site. You can, however, if you're standing on the bluff taking a look into the estuary, you can see some of the old lumber cribs in the estuary themselves, where they today provide some habitat for salmonids. So there isn't much on the ground. Where there is, where there are values, they provide an opportunity for us to do interpretation. Somebody can walk up to a foundation and we can tell the story of that old structure. But in other places, these remnants influence the types of choices that the board of directors will make about ongoing restoration and management. P. McLean asks, is there any remnant of the Chinese community in China Gulch, and where exactly is it on the site? Joan oriented everybody in her previous slides to what we refer to as China Gulch. It's actually a ravine just north of Old State Highway intersection with State Route 1 that goes all the way up to the ridge called China Gulch because of early Chinese settlement during the mid-1800s. There were a number of mill and local workers who resided there at the outskirts of town at the time. But by the end of the 1800s and changes in California law, all of the community had essentially emptied out. We have studied portions of that area that are within RCLC property. We found no superficial remnants or evidence of that community. It's quite likely that much of the area was pretty well disrupted. Well, it's the wrong word, but disrupted when the California Department of Transportation constructed the embankment that holds up Highway 1 today. Another question from Charles Ivor, does PCI get permission from GRT to do upland and or upstream habitat studies on salmonids? Right now, the physical study area for the integrated conservation plan is encompassed entirely within property owned by the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy and Fee, areas within Caltrans right-of-way on Highway 1, Mendocino County Road right-of-way, Old State Road and Wallala Road, and our adjacent landowner, Wallala Arts. We have done investigations essentially for setting archaeological and biological resource context, so primarily literature search offsite. And at this point, we haven't needed to ask GRT for permission to enter their properties. However, I do want to note that John Bennett has been very kind in sharing geographical information, system data with us about the property, as well giving us access to a number of fabulous historic photographs that are hanging in the GRT office. Peter Bay asks, so far there's been no reference to the extensive, diverse, native, submerged, aquatic vegetation beds that emerge in late spring and persist all summer. These beds are rich juvenile salmonid habitat and a target for restoration by NOAA. Will these be considered for protection? And the answer is yes, absolutely. We work in coordination with Cal Fish and Wildlife and essentially are guided by the priorities of state agency and NOAA fisheries. Those are primary study objectives in the portion of the conservation plan that's focused in on potential for aquatic and riparian restoration. We're also pursuing other avenues for salmonid habitat restoration, such as the Fisheries Restoration Grant Program that's administered by Cal Fish and Wildlife, essentially wheeling monies from NOAA fisheries. Lauren, would you like to add anything in response to Mr. Bay's question?
No, I think you covered it pretty well, Dave. Of course, if we get a more extensive project going, all of the existing habitat, beneficial habitats, in particular, the emergent vegetative wetlands will be mapped, and they are of a high importance. And from what I could see last weekend, I acknowledge that I have only been out there this one time, is that there are some, that they're at least patchy. I don't know their full extent, but that would be mapped and taken into consideration in any sort of restoration planning effort.
Lauren, while I've got you on mic, Ronald Dawes, and I'm not sure I have his entire identity in the chat, has asked, have there been any discussions to build canals through this large sandbar? Could you respond, please?
Sure. The sandbar is a natural process. I imagine its height varies annually, and most of the estuaries within the Central Coast here, up and down this coast, other than a few such as Gualala and Noyo, are bar-built estuaries. And so what they've found when the estuaries are actually breached mechanically, that it actually causes detrimental impacts to the ecosystem. So I don't think that the regulatory agencies or the recovery agencies would allow unnatural bar breaching. And we also realize that there's a shift going on with climate change in terms of when we are getting our rains and when that bar breaches. And so that is part of the longer term conversations with the regulatory and recovery agencies, and it's the impacts of climate change on those dynamics with relationship to coho and steelhead accessibility to these watersheds. So I don't think we would be proposing that, but we don't know whether the thoughts on that at a larger statewide and regional wide level would shift.
And again, as we continue to investigate opportunities for habitat and water habitat restoration and conservation, we will likely tread this particular topic again. It's an interesting one, although, as Lauren mentioned, fraught with a number of regulatory concerns. While we're on the topic, though, of salmonid habitat issues, we have two more questions, which I'd like to take, since we've kind of got a wave up at this point, and then we'll respond to a question from Ms. Workman on a different topic. But first from Fred Liefeld, what is today's salmonid population like? What is the current fish population in the estuary and river? Lauren?
Right, so the agency CDFW has been doing annual spawning surveys. The most current information I have is that it's fairly low. Coho are actually, I think, considered extirpated, at least out of the South Fork. There may be a few remnant adults in some of the age classes that are returning into the North Fork, but for the most part, the regulatory agencies consider coho extirpated out of the Wallala just because they haven't been seeing them recently. Steelhead populations vary. For example, I've got some data here in front of me that in 2010, the adult steelheads count in the Wheatfield Fork, for example, was 126 adult steelheads, and that's balanced by a high of 1,400 in the Wheatfield Fork in 2008. The most recent juvenile steelhead counts in the estuary were done by ECOR and Cayman back in 2002 and 2003. And basically, when they did some seining and sampling of the estuary, they were finding 5,000, 4,500 juveniles in the estuary over summering in the site, which was a pretty good count. So the steelhead populations are holding. They vary a lot depending on annual conditions, but overall, just like every other watershed, the populations are extremely depressed and need all the help we can give them.
One more question. Well, actually, we have several more regarding salmonid, but we'll take another one from Mr. Don Hess. How well can salmonid restoration succeed without also addressing degraded conditions further upriver, including tributaries such as the Little North Fork and the North Fork?
To really recover a salmonid population in a watershed, you have to, address every location that they need to utilize. So, every section and all of their habitats need attention. So how I can't answer how successful it will be. What we know is that what RCLC can do is what's on their property. So
that's right.
It's a numbers game, really. The more salmonids you can rear and get successfully out to the ocean, the higher chances you have of having adults return.
The continuing and evolving science of salmonid habitat restoration, as well as the requirements, the ecological requirements of salmonids, indicates, however, that in the condition of the Wallala River, the estuary is of critical importance in the function of this particular river and its geomorphology, which is, of course, the opportunity afforded to Redwood Coastland Conservancy to advance restoration in partnership with Sonoma County Regional Parks in the lower river reach and the estuary. So we're going to pursue what we can, to Lauren's point, and hope that as we are able to make progress, there will be other opportunities to do work upstream. I'd like to turn now to a question from Shayla Workman, who asks, oh my goodness, here we go. She would like to have more information on the partnership with Action Network and its environmental and cultural outreach program. Will this potentially provide an opportunity for children to participate in the restoration of native plants and salmonid habitat? I'm going to ask Tina Batt to take the mic. Tina has been the head of our coordination on programming with the Action Network, including recent grant applications to the Coastal Commission for visitation programs. Tina?
Thank you, Dave. Actually, again, it's the Coastal Conservancy, and
my apologies.
Our wonderful volunteer, Nicole Fort, helped with that grant. We are looking for funding in partnership with Action Network to start what we call our environmental and cultural outreach program, primarily to K through 12 kids and their families. We'll hear about that funding probably sometime this summer. That funding will only provide support for an event, a river festival, but we're hoping to leverage that support into a real program. So we will be seeking additional funding. We're going to approach the Long Foundation and ask for support to actually develop that program with additional partners, our 2 local tribes, as well as Guala Arts, so that we really have a fully developed environmental and cultural outreach program.
Thank you, Tina. I want to mention a couple other dimensions of the Millband Preserve really as a community catalyst. As you heard from Jim earlier in the program, we are making progress on this property in so many ways because people have come to the property to roll up their sleeves or to open their pocketbooks and become a part of the Millband community. And we see that culture of community continuing to expand into opportunities for children to join in those restoration work. It's not just adults who can work up a sweat out there with a shovel, pulling up invasive species, but it's also a crucial focus of our work led now by Elise Allen and Laura Baker to interpret the property, to create visitation opportunities that are not just accessible to a broad range of mobility capabilities, but also to a broad range of interests so that people of all ages can come to the site and learn from their visit through interpretive materials and through coming in touch with what's on the ground at any part of the property. Another question from P. McLean. What is that pond in the center of the Mill Bend Willow area? Is it man-made or natural? Joan, I'm going to ask you to respond to that since you're the ecological master on the consulting team.
Sure. Yeah, my understanding based on what we can see from the shape of the pond itself, it's very difficult to access, although our wildlife biologist did manage to make her way through very dense thicket and mucky wetlands, that it is a man-made feature, but it also sits within an area that is wetland and as Lauren noted, probably was wetter in the past. So it was likely part of the mill operations, and growth has just recovered all around it. But that is also a very wet, naturally wet area.
Thank you, Joan. And thanks everybody who has had an opportunity to ask a question in the chat. We really do appreciate you using the technology. And for those who are still just trying to swimming in with this pile of information, and we apologize for the pace and the amount, but it isn't, we're doing our best to open our books to you. If questions didn't come to mind or you're still kind of sorting through the information that you've heard, please do watch your email inbox. We have your address as a result of your registration. Look for an invitation from Redwood Coast Land Conservancy to take a survey. We'll structure that document with we'll essentially represent the questions and answers that we've talked about today. So we'll have a transcript of that. Any other questions that come in through registrations or any other means, we'll also answer those questions as part of the front end of the survey. And then the survey itself will ask a set of structured questions that will lead you through the materials that you've seen today in the presentation. So keep an eye out. Thanks so much for staying with us through Q&A. Next slide, please. So from here, with your input, essentially your input and another group of stakeholders in the community, this will complete the picture for the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy's Board of Directors to complete the analysis of alternatives and to formulate a preferred alternative decision. This decision will then lead into Prunuske Chatham's completion of a design for a pilot project, which will include a cost estimate and additional assessment of potential effects, as well as a comprehensive plan for future actions in the decades ahead. The plan will, again, express a long-term vision and embed priorities to make sure that those of us who are going to take the reins in the years ahead of us understand the vision of the community, understand the priorities of the community and of the landowner, and the funding and regulatory agencies who are engaged in this work. Before any implementation step, the RCLC Board of Directors must consider lifestyle costs and funding. It isn't enough to get the money to build an improvement to restore habitat. We have to be able to maintain, operate, and ultimately repair those improvements as time goes on. So for example, we would very much like to install a chemical porta potty down at the mill bend in order for visitors this summer to be comfortable and to have a helpful visit. Yet that small thing, that small facility adds up to about $300 a month over the period of time that it would be installed. So we have to have a constant funding stream, not just to make, but also to keep the work that's been done. We will continue to partner with agencies and stakeholders and the community to deliver and maintain these improvements through a variety of means. But ultimately, capacity is a key issue throughout the life cycle of all subsequent stages. And from here, again, with thanks to you, I'd like to turn it over to Tina for the next slide.
Thank you, Dave. Just to answer the other part of Shayla's question quickly, I realize I didn't address that. Yes, we want to involve kids in every aspect of our work. And I see the work of Prunuske Chatham being the basis for our environmental education curriculum. We're very lucky to have that level of information, and to translate that for school kids and their families, I think will be part of and the basis for our environmental education curriculum. So thanks for asking the question. Please stay involved. Visit our website, sign up for our newsletter. Volunteer opportunities abound. We have plenty of them. We are very interested in giving site tours privately, socially distanced with masks. So all of us are available to do that. It's a great way to meet our donors, and it's a great way to involve all of you in the property as we move forward. Look for an email blast with, as Dave said, the polling questions. We'll let you know when that's available, as well as the survey. We are planning a fall forum and a fall Millbend celebration. Our community report will come out later this month or early May. And thanks to the generous support of our private donors and funding partners, we were successful in our $600,000 Millbend stewardship campaign. So we'll describe that. We'll describe the funds raised and where those funds are going. They're going into a restricted account for stewardship of Millbend, a small restricted account at this point, and additional funds for upfront management costs. And you can see what we have ahead of us in terms of the management expenses. But thank you. It was an enormous help for us and also for our funders to see the support of the community. We are a small land trust. We'll stay a small land trust, but we have big responsibilities, as you can see. And we're hoping that state and federal funding will cover the costs as we write the grants for the trail and public access construction and the habitat restoration. As a land trust, we do rely on all of you, our generous and loyal donors, for unrestricted support to fulfill our mission and our ever-growing land management responsibilities. We're also looking for our business partners, as I mentioned earlier, that we can feature in all our publications and on our website. Thanks to everyone today for joining us and supporting the Redwood Coastland Conservancy and Millbend. Take care.
Thanks again for everybody joining us. We are privileged to have your company in this beautiful afternoon. We hope you'll come join us, roll up your sleeves, grab a hoe. It's lots of fun. It's a heck of a workout. We're not here to compete with physical gym, but it really is fun to see the property, to work on it. And please do sign up for a tour. We're eager to show you this really fabulous place, and hope that you can stay with us as the planning process continues in the coming months. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
And Dave, I've posted the links in the chat box that people might want to access.
Like Joel says. And if you get lost, it's rclc.org. Everything's there, and we'll be putting up more information after this event. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye. A lot of good comments.
Really?
I'm just waiting for all the comments to come in before I terminate the forum.